Hi, so in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between a layer 3 switch and a router. Actually, kind of just introduce what a layer 3 switch is. Assuming you know what a layer 2 switch is, here I'm looking at actually a couple of older Cisco switches, but how you can tell the difference between a layer 2 switch and a layer 3 switch? Look at the model number. That's really it. This is 2960, looks like a 3560, a couple of old ones here. But yeah, there's really physically no difference. So first of all, layer 2 switches, we know, forwards frames based on the destination MAC address. It has no concept of IP as far as its forwarding decisions. A router or a layer 3 switch, or called a multi-layer switch, all of these can make their forwarding decisions based on layer 3 address, the destination IP address. All right. So I showed that. Router versus multi-layer switch. So both are used for forwarding packets at layer 3. There are some distinct differences, but these are becoming more fuzzy, kind of more of a gray area, kind of more or less dependent upon the vendor. But kind of generally, port density, routers will have a lower port density, typically some possibly Ethernet ports, maybe some other types of ports, uh, maybe some more fiber optic ports, maybe some older serial ports and things like that. Multi-layer switch will have higher port densities and really just all Ethernet ports and a large number. They may not support some typical router features, but that's, again, vendor dependent. So let's kind of look at where these fit in. In a layer 2 switch, we use this to connect, this is our access to users' access to the network. Okay, so these are known as access switches or access layer switches, but layer 2 only, forward based on destination MAC address tables, do spanning tree, I hope, and a few other things, maybe VLANs and some things like that. Then we've typically had a router that connects our outside world to the inside world. Some Ethernet ports, maybe some other types of ports as well, supporting things like, in the old days, we'd have frame relay and PPP and some other things as well. Layer 3 ports only typically do all kinds of routing, including BGP, if necessary, to route with the ISP. You can use BGP internally as well. Some more complex routing tasks, typically the default route for anything inside our local area network, perimeter firewall, intrusion detection, network translation, VPN, things like this, and maybe some more advanced quality of service features. Now, inside our network, we might be using a multi-layer switch. Why? Because it's really all Ethernet inside our network, and we need a lot of connections. Multi-layer switch or layer 3 switch, only Ethernet ports, does everything. So it can act, the ports can be either layer 2 or layer 3. So it does everything a layer 2 switch does, but we can modify those ports to be layer 3 ports. We'll do routing as well. Could do BGP even, depends on the vendor. Typically the default gateway for our devices within that LAN segment. And again, these lines are becoming blurred over time. All right, let's get started here, talk a little bit about how this works as far as how we're going to be using it. So we've been using routers. And if we look at these routers, we look at the physical interface here. We zoom in. Okay, we can actually see that there's only 2 Ethernet interfaces, not very many. And there's some other modules where we could add some other things, perhaps some more Ethernet interfaces. Okay, but a multi-layer switch, let's take a look at it. We zoom in here, and yes, many more ports. So this one here looks like it's a 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 24 port, and another 4 Ethernet ports there as well. All right, so let's get started. First of all, I'm going to go into CLI here. I'm going to show you something. Tells me it must be powered on. This one here, we actually have to do this. Go to the AC power supply and drag and drop it in. Okay, then we go here, you kind of see it coming up there. I'm going to do that for each one so Rick doesn't forget. I'm not going to do the configurations for all of these, but in case I need to show you. Okay, there we go, because I always forget to do that anyway. All right, so what I'm going to do here is tell me, do I want to enter? There we go. Enter initial configuration dialog mode? No. Now it says switch, but this is a multi-layer switch. Okay, so what I'm going to do here quickly is I'm going to copy in some basic configs here. And you notice I called it router R1. This is just some basic configs, no IP domain lookup, hosting. Call it whatever I want. I can make this just seem like a router. Matter of fact, that's what I'm going to do right here. So what I'm going to do right now by default, if I do show, the easiest way to show the port, all the ports, is show IP interface brief. You can see a bunch of ports here. Okay, and there's some more than 28 ports in total. Now, these are all layer 2 ports by default. Okay, just like plugging into a layer 2 switch here. Okay. I'm going to turn them into routed ports, like a port on a router. Matter of fact, let's just do gigabit 101 and gigabit 102. That should be a, there we go. But I corrected that. There we go. That's easier to see. All right, so actually let me zoom in here. That'll make it a little easier for you to see. Okay, I want to treat these 2 ports just like a router. Okay, so what I can do is this. Okay, config, and I'll change the host name just so we don't get, so you don't get confused. Host, I'll call it L layer 3 switch. How's that? Okay, layer 3 switch. How do you spell switch? I'm having trouble here. There we go. I'll just put a 1 there. Okay. Now, I'm going to go to this interface here, gig 101. Now, what if I tried just giving it an IP address? IP address 192.168, just as if it was a router, right? Says Rick, I don't recognize this command. Matter of fact, if I do IP, these are just, wait a minute, those are layer 2 commands. It thinks it's a layer 2 port right now. So I have to do another command first. At this interface, if I want to turn this specific interface and just that interface alone into a port, just like a router port, okay? Just like gig 00 on that router, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give it the command, no switch port. I'm having trouble here spelling, no switch port. That turns it into a routed port. Now, by default, the state is up, like no shutdown, but it doesn't have an IP address. Matter of fact, yes, I'll show you something else here in a moment. No switch port. Okay, so now I can configure that IP address. Let me go up there, configure that IP address. There we go. Now I'm always used to doing no shutdown, but it's no shutdown by default. Okay, now it has an IP address. Wow. Okay. Really? Well, let's take a look. We're almost there. If I take a look at the routing table, show IP route. Wait a minute, that's not a routing table. What's it showing me? It looks like a host routing table, not a router routing table. One more thing I have to do to turn this into a router. Now, remember, I went into the individual port, and I can do this for all the ports, and I will in a moment. Interface gigabit, whatever port I'm using, no switch port. Then that turns it into what we call a routed port. I can do a layer 3 IP address and stuff. But to turn this, let this layer 3 switch become a router, do routing, I have to issue one more command, IP routing at global configuration. Now, some of this is model dependent on Cisco. meaning some layer 3 switches default to certain things. This switch here actually defaults to layer 2, and I have to make it layer 3. Okay, IP routing. Okay, now if I do exit, show IP route, now it has a routing table. Matter of fact, look at this. It shows it's directly connected network, just like, yes, I'm directly connected here. Okay. Now, if I wanted to make, I want all these ports. I really, I have a lot of ports here. Okay, I want to make them all routed ports. I mean, each one of these ports will be on a separate IP network and have its own IP address, just like having 24 ports on a router. Right now, only this port here, this first one here, gig 101, is a routed port. The other ones are still layer 2 ports, just like an Ethernet switch. Okay, talk more about this in other videos, my other class. Matter of fact, I have a whole playlist that begins to talk about these things. Okay, but let's say for routing purpose, I want to make this a router, period. Okay, so let me go back to CLI. Global configuration mode, I'm going to say interface range, gigabit 101. That's where I was already. I really don't have to, I could make that a 2, but let's make them all. Let's do it from the beginning, 24. And what I'm going to do is say on all of these, no switch. Now, all 24 of those ports, I can configure an IP address on separate networks, just like I would a router. So I can do gig 012. Let's do that. Exit. Okay. Interface gigabit 102. I'm going to give it an IP address. Remember, I've already done the no switch port on this whole range here. So did everything from port 1 to 24. 192.168. 2.1, 255, 255, 2550. Okay. And I'll do no shutdown. I don't have to. It's already up. Okay. Exit. Exit again. Show IP route. Now I have 2 directly connected networks. I've turned this into a route. This is great for doing some of the labs we're going to start doing here from with OSPF. And that is that we're going to be able to create some networks internally that have a lot of different connections, routers that have multiple connections, multiple networks, more realistic of what we'll see internally in an enterprise network. We do show IP interface brief. Okay, we can see that, yes, those 2 devices do have 2 devices. Those 2 ports are now their layer 3 ports, acting as a router. Matter of fact, all of these are, but we just haven't assigned IP addresses to them. But each one is on a separate IP network. And yes, because we did IP routing, I can do commands like, although I have not configured this switch here, multi-layer switch, or layer 3 switch number 2, I could do this, IP route. Maybe I have 192.168, 4.0. Remember our static routing lab that we did? And I'm going to forward those to 192.168, 2.2. Okay. So yes, I can do routing. I can do static routes. I can do OSPF. Okay. On some multi-layer switches, I can do BGP. So if I do exit here, show IP route, there's our static route. So we can now treat this as a router, and we can have all kinds of connections. We're not limited to, a couple of Ethernet interfaces like we are up here. Okay. And again, just to recap here what we did. Okay, all I have to do is make sure that on that port or all my ports, I say no switch port. And then I can assign IP addresses. And then to do routing, don't forget, we have to issue the IP routing command, not no IP routing, IP routing command. All right. So this is what we are going to be using. We'll use both routers and multi-layer switches in our later labs. Matter of fact, you're going to see that in the next lab that I have coming up. on single area OSPF. We're actually going to use multi-layer switches, layer 3 switches internally, and we'll have an edge router that connects to our outside world. All right. Hope you found this helpful, yeah, a lot of fun. Thanks.